Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. This is the last session of the day at the AI media stage as part of the MPTS and their 10-year anniversary. How is everybody feeling? Day 2. Whoa. So, okay, got some thumbs up, ladies. We ready for a glass of wine? Yeah. All right. Got your back. Got your back. Hello, everybody. I'm Mookie Colhan. I'm leading the IBC Accelerator program and been a moderator for MPTS and the subsequent sessions for many years, and so it's my pleasure to be here on stage to introduce our awesome panel. We're gonna be talking about sustainability, but not just that as a topic, but looking at where these high-stakes environmental impact is made, where these paradoxes lie around. Looking to see the conversations around the computational power, what happens when we're talking about rendering in high fidelity and synthetic media, and what is a green production anymore? What is green? What is like a combination of the yellows and blues and the greens that come in the way too? So without further ado, please put your hands together for my lovely panel. I've got Mo Aurora, Dr. Mo Aurora from BBC R&D. Thank you very much. Shona Duggett down here from Fremantle. Thank you very much. Head of Sustainability, Fremantle. And then we've also got Piotr Kappa, Professor Piotr Kappa from the University of Warwick. Welcome, guys. So we thought when we were having a chat about this session last week, we thought we'd have a little bit of fun with this because we're finding like we've got a lot of great information around coming from academia, coming from our broadcaster with BBC. We could be talking about numbers and stats all day long. And then, the really unique perspective coming from a production and distribution, globally renowned, super successful with Fremantle. And we were toying with this idea of like, why not present a live case study right here on stage of what this could actually look like for a production company to be thinking about sustainability in their programming when AI is being used, what to scale back, what to pick up on, how do we look at numbers, how do we report it. So Shauna, my wing woman down there at the end. So but how else would we set the scene? So if we're about to kind of really prepare for strategy.
Yeah, so as the only non-doctor up here, I'm going to go...
Dr. Mook, I'm working on it.
I'm going to go bigger picture.
We'll all have a PhD by the end of this session.
Perfect.
Everyone in the room. Okay.
So yeah, let's start with the obvious tension. The obvious tension, we know that AI has an enormous environmental cost. I don't need to tell you that. At the same time, there is huge potential for the use of AI, not just in our industry, but more widely, to realize enormous carbon savings as well, what you might think of as a carbon handprint versus a carbon footprint. And just like any technology, it can be used for good and it can be used for bad. And we are in what's been called the Oppenheimer moment. And I don't need to tell you what happened with Oppenheimer and the decisions that were made there. We can use nuclear power to wean ourselves off of our fossil fuel addiction, or we could use it for, well, what the state of reality is. So the point is AI will simply reflect the state of human reality back to us. So we need to be, it's our job to use tools in the most responsible way possible. The question is, how do we do that? So we're trying to move the conversation away from AI is inherently bad for the planet to, like any tool, we need to try and use it in a way that solves more problems than it creates. But we need to be very honest in that right now we don't have access to enough data to really understand those trade-offs and make decisions based off of those trade-offs. So there are sort of two threads of things that we're thinking about. One is working and collaboration is very important with initiatives like DIMPACT and the Responsible Media Forum to contribute to real-life case studies where we're using it in production today to understand what are the potential carbon savings here, and working with producers to get hold of that data, and then working with organizations like the Carbon Trust, who are the smart carbon accountants who can work all this out. It reminds me a lot of my previous role working at Oatly, the oat milk company, nothing to do with this industry, and the whole sustainability approach there is by switching to oat milk, you are reducing your carbon footprint compared to cow's milk. Now, to do that, you need to invest in very rigorous comparative life cycle analysis studies that are ISO standard, yada, yada. We don't have that in production today. So we're going out on a bit of a limb. We know our labels, we have about 60 labels around the world, are already using AI tools, and it's our job to work out where are they using them, how are they using them, and how can we work with them to gather that data to showcase this can be used in a really fantastic way.
Yeah.
It can also be detrimental.
Yep.
In the meantime, we need to create guardrails whilst we're waiting for all the smart people to sort out the data side of things.
They're working on it in their
right,
head
and that's where
right
the doctors
now. Can
come
you hear
in.
the numbers
Yeah, they're
turning?
doing the
Okay.
maths. Then it's our job to say, okay, well, what can we be doing whilst we're waiting for that? So if
Yeah.
we're looking to build our own AI tools internally, can we build those guardrails in with the team to say, can we get a sense of whether this is going to create more carbon than it reduces
Yep.
before we agree to build that tool? When
Yeah.
we're partnering with vendors, can we put clauses in our contracts and in the negotiations that say, how are you procuring your energy? Is it renewable? And if it isn't today, do you have a plan? So those
Yeah.
are the sorts of conversations we're having at the moment.
What a brief, gentlemen. Are we ready to turn out numbers? Thank you, Sean. I think that sets the scene for how, not only Fremantle, but it's probably going through so many production teams around the world, because the topic of sustainability and energy is it's a global item to be talking about. So from that brief, metrics comes up and numbers. So Rohit, starting with you and a lot of the research that you do around actionable metrics and, looking at an AI-driven production house or post-production house, what's the kind of single most important data metrics that Shana could be, that you can ask for to prove that the work is low carbon? What have you found in your research, especially recent research?
Yeah, I think the important bit here, and completely agree, with all the uncertainties around data, and knowing that you're using mix of tools. So you have some tools which are in-house. That means that you're running them yourself. You know a bit more about what kind of compute those tools are using, but then you also rely on industry offerings. And so in production workflows, if you're buying tools from outside, it's a challenge to really find out what the compute really looks like, right? So the important question, of course, in GenAI-driven production workflows is knowing how much compute has gone into a specific workflow or a specific production. However, as you would work through the current offerings, a lot of tools do not have that visibility. You would either get some sense of number of credits being burned by the by the activities or let's say the sets that you're creating or modifications that you're doing in the background and all sorts of stuff. And those credits do not really mean anything in terms of compute. It's a opaque number. In some cases, you can get number of tokens processed, and that is where you can really get some insights to say how many tokens overall, what sort of data center, which location. These metrics are important. We have started conversations on them from all providers, what kind of data we need to track. I think the compute numbers are not there. It's just that when you have fully internal tools, that then you can see what kind of cloud compute you have utilized, and in those cases you can maybe make a sense of what you have really achieved. But the other challenge really is to find a like-to-like comparisons.
Okay.
So in cases where you have generative AI really delivering something that you can't necessarily compare in a traditional workflow. So an example could be that, let's say, you want to have a scene set in 1800s, a historical scene where you're trying to create a scene where you're using local kind of built environment, local settings, and that sort of stuff. You can't necessarily recreate that in studio. You have to then rely on generative AI or VFX, and of course you can compare the two. It's a question of, again, saying, is it really an apple-to-apple comparison? So sustainability being inherently subjective, there are these metrics that needs to be worked out. And that's what I think we are doing right now, along with Impact. So the work that hopefully will come out during the London Climate Week. So we would have some more insights.
Right. So just to reiterate, so it's putting some evidence, doctor-approved evidence. The metrics aren't there. How do you do the quantitative analysis? How do you do the measurements? And is that based off the live production, pre-production, post-production, and during production? But is that like a government issue? Is it, we talked about, does that kind of give us what we call green limbo? Maybe over to you, Pierre. So where does a production company then start if they feel like they are in a green limbo? And is it something that you are just kind of putting side by side traditional production and an AI-driven production.
Yeah.
So can you layer in some advice, please?
Yeah, thank you for that. So, yeah, I think so. If we start to look at AI and sustainability from a regulatory or policy-based angle, we more or less kind of need to go to the top, which is the government. And there's more or less an emphasis on competition and openness with the current government as it comes to AI, not so much about regulating AI. And this ties into how AI plays into sustainability. But if we, for example, look at, so governmental approaches have left AI development more or less to be kind of self-regulatory in a way. So you've got these sort of distinct authorities, let's say like the financial authorities, FCA, will be exploring financial transactions as pertains to AI. You might have Ofcom, for example, look at online safety, or you have the Information Commissioner's Office explore notions around data and AI. But there isn't really someone that does this for the media, especially screen media sector in a way. So this would probably be someone like Ofgem, but they won't really touch screen media in a way. So this leaves more or less that what you've described as a limbo in a way. So or it could be called a responsibility deficit almost in terms of top-down governance and therefore policy for the sector. And that in a way leads to relatively relaxed guidelines, a lack of metrics, lots of goodwill and lots of great action from the company side themselves. But if there isn't this sort of let's say top-down incentives in terms of economic or regulatory approaches that you have, for example, in the EU, this is a problem for the sector itself, that there isn't necessarily that sort of push to have green thinking embedded into AI integration in the screen sector.
Yeah. Right.
Can I add something there?
I was just going to come to you. Yep.
Just because there's also there's also no consumer pressure, because it's not a consumer-facing industry. No one is sitting down watching a film and wondering what the carbon footprint of that film is. Whereas, again, if I stick with the food example, we might, it's a bit more in the public consciousness to make some decisions about what I buy in the supermarket based on the carbon impact or the environmental impact of that. So in that world, we don't have the pressure from regulation, nor do we have the pressure from consumers. So the way I see it is it's totally up to us to whether it's goodwill or it's I'd like to think it's more about, responsibility, duty of care, ethical considerations. And what is missing from this, the title in here, the invisible footprint, we're referring to carbon. What I would welcome is a more nuanced discussion, a more holistic discussion about the ethical and responsible considerations where we are replacing, things that will reduce carbon are probably also things that are going to affect people's livelihoods, affect local communities, and we can't, we need to consider sustainability as a whole and not just focus on the carbon in a silo, but really think about the wider impacts, the wider environmental impacts as well.
Yeah, and I loved your phrase, like the carbon handprint.
Yeah.
How can we define this term?
Yeah.
Per se.
And probably, unfortunately, as we all know, if we're in the sustainability world, there's no such thing as being sustainable. It's all trade-off anyway. I could imagine we have a world where there's a carbon handprint, i.e. a carbon saving to be had. There's probably a social footprint on that if we're sticking with the same vernacular.
Yeah.
You probably can't have one with the other. Just like the lowest carbon form of packaging is a plastic bottle. Right? Yeah. But we don't like to think that because the optics are rubbish, excuse the pun. And so we prefer to use glass, but the reality is that has a higher carbon impact. So it's all about those trade-offs.
And I want to stick with you, Shona, because part of that as a production company, you're stepping up and taking that responsibility and starting your own due diligence. Obviously, we do lead into academia and research and where we can get those learnings to build up to that. But can you tell us a bit more about your Imagine Studios? So this is where we're looking to, embed that sustainability, build those guardrails, and, are you able to kind of drive that efficiency so there is the net zero by 2030? Keep in mind, 2030 is only 4 years away now.
Right.
Yes. Is it 2035? Are we nudging it?
Right. So at Fremantle as a whole, we have a science-based carbon target to reduce our emissions by half by the year 2030, which, as you say, is tomorrow, compared to a 2018 baseline. And actually, the use of AI is going to be an enormous lever for us to pull to get that. I don't believe we can reach our carbon target without the use of AI if deployed responsibly, right? And that's where the point comes in. Imaginate Studios is slightly different. It's just one of our labels. We have many across the world, across all genres, docs, entertainment and drama. Imaginate is an AI-only studio, so they are creating purely AI content. But our AI strategy is across the entire board, and we are a brand new AI team, and we're also a brand new sustainability team, and reconciling those two things is our work now. And of course, there's a lot of fear. The first thing I get asked when I meet someone new in the business is, what about AI? How can we have this enormous AI strategy, but also a like what? And our job is to reconcile those two things, because I do believe they can go hand in hand if done well.
Right, so the studio's just launched and you're starting to craft those guardrails and the benchmarking. So I think, you know, when we've been chatting before, we know that there's the AI Creative Media Summit that the team behind MBTS also run in November at the BFI. So we want to set everybody a 6-month challenge on where everybody is today, from today within 6 months' time. But it'll be really great to catch up with you then, have a little part 2 of this discussion, because we do want to know, where does standardization of this reporting come in? You know, where does the benchmarking come in? How do we, you know, how are you capturing it? Do you have to report back to Albert per se too? But like, what are your views on that? You know, as far as
I think it's an area where we have huge audience concerns. We see significant pressure and a right expectation, at least from public sector broadcasters, that they deliver on their sustainability commitments. We do have SBTi approved net zero targets, and we're doing well on our scope 1 and scope 2, scope 3, something that is a challenge for everyone. I think we are working through it. Generative AI primarily is, again, an important question, and we do have to answer that question as to what kind of, pressure it would create. We have basically looked at our own internal numbers. It's not right now a very significant pressure.
Still a lot of testing then.
Yes, but it's because in the end, the generative AI is, again, more cloud computing, and as a media organization, you already rely on cloud computing quite a lot. It's a question of which tools are going to deliver the capabilities that actually be adopted and then really deliver the experiences that you would get from a traditional production. That's the question that we are testing, right? And that's where we have looked at our overall generative AI adoption across teams, different tools, what kind of usage we are seeing. Some uses is clear. We are seeing trends there. Some uses, as I said, some tools don't necessarily provide the kind of data we want. And so the idea really is that you should be able to at least prepare the providers to say, this is the data that we need. No one is really asking these questions to say, hey, can you give me my overall compute for this tool, because I have to understand my energy consumption. Because right now everyone is—
Because there are no standards.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, so expectation for productions, I mean, there are now definitely standards for generative AI per se and AI systems in general, data centers as well.
Right.
So there are standards out there.
Yes.
But if you were to ask for standards primarily for media workflows, there isn't. And one of the methodology we have been working with Carbon Trust through Impact is basically just developing a first attempt at looking at media production workflows and how can we estimate Gen AI footprint. But again, the challenge is a lot of data that you would need to feed into that method has to come from Gen AI providers. Now, media sector companies do not themselves are the Gen AI model creators, or we are in the end consumers. And so we need a bit more transparency and openness from
dear AMD, dear AMD, dear HP, dear NVIDIA, everybody to help provide you with that.
So to get those numbers in and say, okay, this is what the footprint looks like. But for BBC, I think both from public perspective and internally, there is a huge interest and question as to say, are we doing a good job balancing our Gen AI adoption with the net zero commitments that we have made? And we are trying to make sure that we are on top of everything that is being adopted and the scale at which it is adopting and see what kind of footprint there is really.
Right. I mean, that leans into your research as well, Pierce. I mean, we know that there's no legislation that is dictating, or prioritizing sustainability of where, Shona, the team in Fremantle might be looking into this research on this side, but then also setting your own guardrails, as you've just said, setting up your own labs to try to figure these out. But what happens if and when that day comes where there will be rules in play for the manufacturers to take responsibility, for the cloud compute to take responsibility, which means then Shona, her team, can get on with making creative content and creative production to distribute around the world. So Piazza, I mean, like, what else can producers, maybe it's just something to use in their contracts, can they start to implement things in their contract now to their AI vendors to like make an impact and kind of force some guardrails on them?
Yeah, because, well, in a way, the challenge from the producer perspective is that you're in between these two layers. So you've got top-down governance, you've got your users, and they've both got their own footprints and their own agendas around AI, which often don't then really impact on the ways that producers do their thing in a way. So for a producer, I would probably say that the most important thing for them to make sure that they are trying to be sustainable is to look at the AI providers' footprints and try to find provisions that are third-party verified, for one, and ones that are, in a way, as transparent as possible. That's one of the challenges at this point in time.
Verified by the government? Or
no, well, by any of these third-party authorities.
Got you.
There's plenty of these sort of organizations that do this, and that's another problem, of course, is that who do you trust in terms of your verification, of course. But it's really this sort of the black box of AI is the challenge. That again, you can do a lot of excellent stuff like many companies and screen agencies and beyond are doing. But if we don't know what goes on behind the scenes in a transparent way, in a verifiable way, that becomes very difficult to action in practice.
Right.
And that then bound up with the lack of regulation and lack of user awareness makes it a really challenging complication in a way of multitude of things. In a way.
Exactly, and it's kind of a really exciting time because we are on the cusp of this now. 6 months from today, Peter. Oh wait, Shona, we're going to unpack this and see where we get to. Because how exciting would it be to have something, at least the start of something being tangible. So obviously we're talking about things that are kind of present day, but very forward facing. And back to you, Shona, around, building your workforce. And, are new roles being created, and how do you implement that green digital literacy, of where educating, and understanding where that carbon footprint comes in for, digital prompts and the builds of the LoRa's and things like that. Where are you guys thinking?
So we're, as we said, very, very early on, brand new AI team, brand new sustainability team, and we don't have answers
Which is so
to those
exciting,
things
by the way,
yet.
yes.
But we're working it all out. And I think the literacy piece is the most important piece. As I mentioned already, there's a lot of fear. I've had conversations with people in production team who said, I don't even want to use ChatGPT because of the carbon impact of that. And then we can gently guide them and say, but what did you have for lunch today? Did you eat a hamburger with beef in it? Okay, well that's, and I don't quote me on the figure, but we've got, loads of graphs and things to say, well that's, X thousand times higher, more water usage than that ChatGPT query that you put in.
Right.
And again, it's just, climate literacy is always important in any sustainability program. The challenge we have is being able to communicate that to our teams. We're a global workforce. We have more than, depending on what we've got in a production, we might have 5,000 employees around the world. We cannot talk to them all. So it's working with my lovely team here to build the resources and the guidance to help educate around that. And we don't have all the answers. We're trying to work out even just how to collaborate with the AI team at the minute. Any ideas? Very, very welcome. Come and chat to us.
Would that be in a contract of a new employee contract, and you just tell,
Must be
you
climate
tell
literate.
HR this
Yeah.
is what's happening,
Yeah.
and that's
Well,
your
on
contract.
contracts, the more
With a new employee, I mean.
but the
Yeah.
more powerful thing would be to your point, which is
Yes.
the law needs to mandate that every single company in the world has to share their carbon data when they enter a contract with a vendor or supplier.
Yes.
And I know that's being looked at the EU level, but with the political landscape being what it is, and the Trump backlash, and everyone's green hushing, this isn't moving forward. And again, if the regulators aren't asking for it, and if we're in an industry where consumers definitely aren't asking for it, it has to come from us.
Right, right. Again, I look forward to the progression of that in the next couple months' time. We do have some questions coming in from the audience as we're into our grand finale, the last session of the day, down to happy hour. Please use the Slido and the hashtag here if you've got any other questions coming in. But this one, very popular audience member, Anonymous. Love this person. In addition to carbon, in addition to carbon, should we and how can we factor in damage to water resources and affected communities?
Yeah, I think this is a very important topic, and at least in the last 2.5 years, water has gotten more recognition than it used to do for, in general, cloud computing. So we are seeing at least numbers coming out. The challenge, of course, with water is it is a very localized resource, and so you have a data centers coming up. You can't necessarily supply water from thousands of miles away. It in the end has to get its waters from the vicinity, and that of course puts that pressure into the local infrastructure. It puts pressure onto local ecological systems. So there are of course at least efforts from large scaler, hyperscaler Gen AI providers to put more money into investing more water efficient technologies. There are efforts, at least in part by some companies, to replenish water in other areas. But I think this is now a more recognized problem than it was, and we are seeing some progress in terms of commitments being made to either reduce the water demand or replenish the water. The one thing that has not really gotten traction is the water footprint associated with the electricity itself. And so the water usage effectiveness has become more of a key thing now, along with most data centers planning permission requirements. Less and less recognition for electricity that comes through, because when you produce electricity, there is water consumption in that process, and there is quite interesting stuff that came out just last week, comparing how water stresses in different regions can make a single query's impact up to 50 times more if you were to doing the same thing somewhere in India compared to you're doing this in London or somewhere in California. And so it's 0.3 ml is not really 0.3 ml exactly the same in different parts of the world. And so there is, again, it's a question of regulation. But there is definitely bigger recognition on this.
But maybe there's been something published to name names of the companies that are looking after that, and name companies that are kind of like on the downslope there too. Have you found documentation around this?
On water
or have you
use.
done research?
Well, water use, in a way, at least to me, is a bit like offsetting in a way that it's part of this the wider impacts of AI on social ecosystems as well. So it's not only the water, it's not only the carbon, it's the locations where server farms, AI farms, where the water is being used. That's one of those sort of areas that needs to be factored into any sort of sustainability conversation, and it's often not a big part of the net zero conversation, whereas it probably should be, because it's part of the sustainable development goals. So a lot of the research that's going on in terms of, let's say, social sustainability does often look at water scarcity and the impacts that has on communities and the locations in which a lot of the water that's being used for these services is being effectively polluted in some way. So it's the wider implications of AI beyond the carbon, beyond the kind of the material impacts into the social sphere of things as well.
It's a lot to think about, and it's a lot to take into consideration. That's hopefully food for thought for our live case study here, and hopefully that's lots of information to plug into your mission at Fremantle to can we get to net zero by 2030? We're on our way. We're starting today. And I think, we can meet this time in 6 months' time and see where we are in comparison, with our research, with the academia and the other studies being used, and within our real-world use case within Fremantle and production, and hopefully we can share this knowledge with the rest of our industry and community. So thank you so much, Shona. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Rohit. My name is Mookie. Thank you so much for supporting MBTS. We'll see you down for a beer. Thank you.